morning to all. In today's session, we are all going to learn about the collection and the presentation of data. Let's begin with the terms data and information. Data refers a number, a symbol, any character, any numeric code, any graphs in numbers that is exactly called data. Whereas information is data put into the context. It, it is utilized by the human beings in a very significant manner to make up a meaningful decisions, to forecast any particular decision, etc. A basic example of information would be a computer. A computer who uses the programming system, the scripts, the formulas, any software's application which turn the data into the information. And that information will be used by the researchers, individual to prepare any meaningful decision for the growth of the business. And that is exactly called the data and information. So let's come up the distinguish between the data and information. So data is all about the collection of the facts, but information put these facts into the context. Data is unorganized in every way, and a particular individual has to organize the data so that it turn into the information in a very organized manner, and that's why the information is organized manner. Data does not depend on any sort of information because data it's complete in itself, but somehow it couldn't be complete without any information. Information is totally depend on data. On other hand, data is not sufficient for a meaningful decision or a decision making process, but information is sufficient for a decision making process. Let's begin with the next section, that is the differentiate between the primary and secondary data. So the data is classified into two main categories on the basis of the sources from which they can obtain. The first one is the primary data and the second one is the secondary data. So the primary data is it's collected on the first hand. That means this is an original data which are collected through the field surveys, questionnaires, etc. For example, the World Bank record tracked the impact of COVID-19 in Afghanistan through 14,000 phone surveys, and the data collected through these surveys is actually called the primary data. The next come to the secondary data. Secondary data is the data which is obtained from the journals, any published reports, any other database which are usually prepared and available on an open source data, and that is exactly called the secondary data. And there are few examples which classified into a secondary data, or in other words we could say the secondary research, which include the textbooks, the news articles, university published research papers, and any other any other web portals, or any published market research, any academic journals, etc. And even the particular researcher can also use the government records, the published demographic research, which is totally based or considered as a secondary data. Let's talk about the comparison of primary and secondary database or data. So these are the various criteria or the factors that could be considered to distinguish between the primary and secondary data. The first one is data. Primary data is a real-time data, which is the original itself, but the secondary data is the data which is already collected by the various the past researchers. The next criteria is process. Primary data is a very complex process, and somehow it takes a lot of time to collect the data. But secondary data is the easiest process which is already being collected, and that could be a source for that could be a secondary source for the researchers or individuals. The next criteria is sources. Survey, experiments, polls, observations, outcomes are the few sources that comes under the primary data. But in case of the secondary data, websites, books, journals, and articles that also considered as a secondary sources. The next criteria is collecting time. As primary data is a, or you can say the primary data collection is a very time consuming process, but secondary data is a short time consuming process. The next criteria is a cost effectiveness. It is a very expensive process to collect the primary data, but in case of the secondary data, is a very economical or a cheap, you can say cost cheap effectiveness in case of the secondary data. The next criteria is the availability. The primary data is to be is to be collected in an organized manner, and it has to be organized in a very structured form. In case of the secondary data, the data is already in an unstructured form, and the particular researcher has to use that secondary data in and prepared in a very organized manner according to the study. The next section, that what are the methods, primary data collection methods which are used by the individuals for their own studies. So the first is the case study, dig site, oral histories, questionnaires, documents and records, focus groups, experiments, polls, as we are using the survey polls in a various social web platforms. The next is observations and interviews. So these are all the primary data collection methods. So let's have a view of all of these methods one by one. So the first one is interviews. So interviews is always is a process of direct communication between the researcher and the participants, and these are can be conducted in a very structured manner, in which the researchers come up with the predefined questions or any unstructured questions or open-ended questions are always being allowed during the interview process. Moreover, interview can be conducted into two main ways. The first one is the personal interview, and the second one is the telephonic interview. When it comes to the personal interview, the researcher asks the questions from the other persons through face-to-face mode, and this interview can be structured, can also be unstructured, and it also refers to the focused, you can see, communication or the conversation between the researcher and the participants. The next is a telephonic interview. In this particular method, the data collector gathers all the sort of information by contacting the other person on a on the telephone or over the telephone, and asking the questions verbally, and accordingly the responses will be gathered or the recorded during this particular method or using this method. The next, you can say, method of primary data collection is observation. This type of primary data collection method, it always includes recording the events or the phenomena by a direct observation. So in this method, it is more subjective and need no structured questionnaires or unstructured questionnaire. Is through the information can be gathered through the direct observation of the researcher, and this data collection method is always allow the researcher to add on their own judgments to the respective data that they have collected using this method. Sometimes there may be a chances of minimum errors, but it provides the original data, or in other words, we could say the first hand information. And moreover, the primary purpose of the data collection method could be the behavioral studies through that how to analyze the behavior or the perceptions of the individuals or the working professionals. And the next the next primary purpose is inspection and evaluation of any of the behavior of the demographic characteristics of the individual or the population. Next is gathering the information about the current processes. This is also the one of the primary purpose of the observation. So this is a purpose of observation method, that use of the behavioral study to analyze the behavior of the population or of the individuals in any sort of organizations, or you can near the surroundings. Then next, it could be conducted. The observation method could be used to conduct through the you can say thrown information. So if a particular researcher need to evaluate the perception, the knowledge, the satisfaction, the experience levels of all of any of the respective individuals or the participants, this can be a method could be used. The next one is this method could be used to collect the data on the current scenarios. So, so this is the three main purposes of the observation method. So there are few merits and demerits of the observation method. The first one is directness. Observation are known for being honest in its own way. So whatever the researcher could observe anything near the surroundings or based on the objectives, that could be the honest review of that particular information. The next is artifice can be minimized. Observation can reduce the reception in research. So what you see, there is no need to make them rely that it make them others to believe that sort of information. No, it always, the researchers always try to reduce this deception in research through observation method. The next is recording devices can be used. It is very easy that through the observation method, it could be record the you can see the responses through the electronic devices to increase the accuracy of the observational data collection. There are few demerits as well. Time consuming. That's true that observation method is a very time consuming and the laborious as well. Expensive. It could be an expensive as well, and the researchers who are actually willing to spend you can say plenty of amount, that could be that could be on such, this method could be used by him or her. Next is a lack of depth. Observation may lack depth and a qualitative richness. And the next and the last is the observation influence. There could be a greater chances of the observer influencing the behavior of the sample group. The next is ethical problems. So if the ethics are not handled properly, then of course the legal action could be taken. The next is reactivity. In participant observation, the participants may change their behavior according to the scenarios because they know they are being observed. So sometimes it could be a disadvantage for the researcher studies. The next method is polls. This is the most popular primary data collection method in a particular research, that a quick review of the audience sentiments. Generally, poll involves a single or a multiple choice question, which is an easiest way for the researcher to get the people opinions or the people views on the respective real scenarios. And moreover, this method could be conducted by various platforms. It could be your YouTube, Facebook, or any other social platforms which are available and exist or the population are actually using. Once the respondents submit their answer, it could be compared with those of the other respondents, and accordingly the meaningful data could be summarized. So to write up an effective poll questions, there are few instructions that could be used by the researcher. The first one is use the natural questions and answer. Add the close-ended question. Try to add a diverse set of question instead of a similar questions which could be bored by you can say in the minds of the participants. So these are the tips to make an effective poll. So use the natural question and answer that could not be copied from the other sources, that could not be similar from the any other portals. So you but the second tip would be for the researcher to add the close-ended questions. That means to use the multiple choice question. Either it could be the 4 options with or the 5 options or any other rating scales. The next is it could also cover you can say diverse set of question instead of the similar questions. So it to get to better understand the various opinions of the population or of the selected population or a selected sample group. The next method is experiment. So this is a most common method as well to establish a causal and the you can say effect relationship between the two variables or events. So in this particular process, the researcher investigate the one or more variables and accordingly they could record the impact on other variable. That means what would be the influence of one variable on other variables. So the variables which are not manipulated by other variables are actually known as independent variables, and the one which change due to the manipulations or the changes of other variables that could called the dependent variables. Experiment method is used for the various fields including the medical research, biology, sociology, psychology and agriculture. The next method is a focus groups. Focus group method is a combination of interview and observation. And when a particular set of questions would be given or asked in a group, that these two methods would be used, and when the combination of these two methods could be used, that is exactly called the focus group method. So this method includes the group discussions between the participants and the researcher, and additionally one of the main purpose of this method is to identify the collected data elements. So this method is also motivates the participants to watch a presentation or read the various case studies so that they can discuss that respective content during the group discussion, and also willing to ask an open-ended questions as well. So it is also required a team of the experienced facilitators so that they could conduct such study, or they could conduct a group discussion study. So focus groups are among the top primary data collection methods in the marketing research. The next method is the documents and records. This is also the one of the easiest and the most feasible method to collect the primary data. And a particular researcher can also gather, you can say, a considerable amount of information using this method without asking any sort of questions to any selected group or to anyone. And the researcher could also use the documents and the record-based studies so that they could accommodate or accumulate the data for the research studies. And there are some types of this research could be the financial record, statistical data, and meeting the minutes. And moreover, this data collection method is more effective and cheap because the researcher only have to gather the data from the existing files or the existing records. This method turns to be an incomplete data source because a data collector has no control over the results, whether the results could actually show a true credential of its study or not. And that's why if a particular researcher used this record, it could be termed as the incomplete data, which could be a disadvantage of this method. That's called documents and records. The next method is the questionnaires. A survey or a questionnaire consists a series of questions to investigate the experiences of other people. So questionnaires is one of the method to investigate that what would be the experience of other people in the in the existing scenarios. In this particular method, the questions that could be a close-ended or a open-ended questions to be asked that could be in a structured or an unstructured manner. This data collection method is most suitable for a high frequency research where a high number of participants are involved. So the following are the places where the survey or the questionnaires are mainly used. The first one, the online data collection. So if any researcher is collecting the data through online mode, so this method is more appropriate. The respondents filled out the form through the web browser and gave answers to some of the questions during this process. The next is the offline data collection. Some survey tools are being introduced that always allow the researchers to share their valuable feedback or the views without any internet connection. And the last one is anonymous data collection. In this particular method, the survey tools protect the respondent identity and provide valuable insight from the studies or from their studies. Now, the next is what are the instruments used through the questionnaires method. The first one is the personal interviews. In this method, the interviews sit face to face with the respondents and record all its responses. And the information is likely to be more accurate and reliable because the interviewer are clear up all his doubts and cross check the respondents as well. And that's also true that it is a time consuming process and costly method because the number of respondents are more, and of course the questionnaires are to be widely distributed through this method. The next instrument is a mail questionnaires. In this method, a list of questions is to be prepared in a structured manner and mailed to the respondents. And the respondents are expected to fill up the questionnaires and return to the investigator through email. And this method could be easily adopted where the field of investigation are very vast and the respondents are spread all over India or all over you can say a wide geographical areas. But this method could be adopted only when the respondents are literate and can able to understand the language of the written questions, and accordingly they could answer them. And these are the two main instruments through the questionnaires method. And the next method or the instrument could be called a telephonic collection of data. In this method, the investigator asks the relevant question from the respondents over the telephone, and this method could be the less expensive, but it could be a chances of having a limited responses of the question asked through telephone to the participants, and somehow the few questions could be asked on telephone, and of course we cannot you can say identify that whether the respondent or the participant was exactly interested to answer the questions or not. So there of course it could be a disadvantage using this method called a telephone collection of data collection method. So there are a few merits of the questionnaires and demerits as well. The first one is cost effective. Questionnaires are relatively cheap when compared to the in-person or a telephonic survey. The next is faster. Online surveys can be immediately completed faster than the traditional methods of research, and the information is easily gathered automatically. The next one is the design flexibility. Survey makers can be used to create a customized layout and the visuals and even more. The next is easy to implement, and there are many online tools that could make the process of implementing the surveys or the questionnaires in a straightforward manner. There are a few demerits as well of the questionnaires method. The first one is the response rates. Low response would be possibility due to the which leads to an inaccurate survey, and the surveys with low response rates may give an over optimistic results. The next is methodologies are restricted. It's we can also, in other words, we can also say that it's not for all the market researchers methodologies are possible over the telephone method. Next, it neglects emotions. Online questionnaires cannot capture that what customers feels while answering the questions. The last demerit is validity. Questionnaires can constrain the distort the way the respondents answer, and which can lead to a lack of validity. The next section under the questionnaires method is how to design the questionnaires. First, we need to prepare a covering letter. Every questionnaire should be contain a covering letter, and that letter must highlight the purpose of study and assure the respondent that their you can say valuable information or the responses will be kept confidential. The next is the number of questions should be kept to be minimum. So the fewer favor the questions, the greater would be a chances of getting the more accurate or better responses and having all the questions to be answered. Next, the questions should be simple, short, and ambitious. The questions should be simple, short, and easy to understand for the respondents, and such that the answers and their answers would not be similar, it would be different and diverse as well. Questions of sensitive or the personal nature should be avoided, and the question should not be such would require the respondent to disclose any personal, private, or a confidential information. Next, the answers to questions should not require any sort of calculation or any mathematical formulas to be used. The questions should be framed in such a way that the answers do not require any calculators or calculations. Next is a logical arrangement, data collection of data. The question should be logically arranged so that there should be a continuity of the responses, and the respondent do not feel the need to refer back of the previous questions. And the last is cross-check and footnotes. The questionnaire should contain some such questions which act as a cross-check to the reliability of the information provided. For example, when a question relating to the income is asked, it is desirable to include the question, "Are you an income tax assessee?" So this is something that a particular question is to be asked in a very simple manner, and easily we can check the reliability of the information by the respondent or the participant as well. So this is a sample of the questionnaire, and using where a particular researcher using a feedback or the research question, and this is how the particular beginning of the you can say, or you can the covering letter of the you can say questionnaire. So the first would be the personal details, where the personal information is the questions. Personal information question is to be asked. Begin with the full name, age, gender, locality, reason, marital status, occupation, etc., and so on. And the second section would be based on the objective, whether it could be whether it could be to assess the usage and experience of the customers, that this is how the question is to be prepared, that how did you you can say hear about the product or the service. So you can also, and there are various four options are available, so the respondent can easily answer any one option as well. And same category, the second question, and so on questions would be asked, and accordingly, and the question should be framed in such a manner that the particular participant or the respondent can be easily understand and answer all the questions which has been asked in the in the questionnaires. The next is pre-testing the questionnaire. In other words, we can also call a pilot survey or a pilot study. So once the questionnaires has been decided or has been designed, it is important to pre-test the questionnaire. The pre-testing of the questionnaire, in other words, we can also call a pilot survey or a pilot study, which which is precedes the main survey work. So pre-testing allow the rectification of the problems or any inconsistent exist or any repetition exist in the questionnaires, and that was the main reason to do the pre-testing of the questionnaires. So if any changes required, the necessary modification can be made before administrating the questionnaires, and the some questions are to be found irrelevant. It could be detected, and if some questions have to be included, the same can be done immediately. So pre-testing must be done with almost care, otherwise the unnecessary errors or unwanted changes may be introduced in this particular process. So if time and resources permit, a second pre-testing can also be done to ensure the greater reliability of results. So the proper testing, revising, and the retesting could definitely yield the high dividends for the studies. The next method of the primary data collection, that is called the oral histories. Oral histories may sound like interviews, but this method involves recording, protecting, and analyzing the historical data. And this historical data may include the personal experiences or the opinion of the people which could be involved in the experiments as well. So this method links with only one event the specific research technique in. So in moreover, in this particular method, there is no chance of confounding any variables that eventually leads to be in any based opinions or views or feedbacks for the studies. The next method is DigSite. The DigSite platform is best for conducting the qualitative research and discover that what the people think about the specific techniques or study. This method is also empowers the researchers to gather a valuable qualitative data through the various methods. The first one is a focus group, video interviews, and polls. So this method is always refers to an open-ended research, surveys, and questionnaires. It secure the research method that could anyone can use, but some students need more data collection skills, and accordingly they could help with their research papers and from the way based on the experiences, and such writers and the writers who are using this platform are to be skilled in conducting any sort of research and writing up the successful papers for the students using this platform. The next method is the case studies. Like oral histories, who uses the historical data for the study, the case study is also used to study a single entity or including a phenomenon, process, or study. So with the help of this method, researcher could easily understand a particular situation or circumstances as well. Moreover, there are various type of methods of collecting the primary data, and accordingly the researcher could use the various methods including interviews, observation, document and records using the case studies method. So in this method, it is suitable for the unique studies and provide a complete insight into a complex issues. So there are a few examples of the primary data collection method. The first one is consider a children's store that wants to launch a new toy collection. They want to know what exactly the kids like or dislike. So in order to achieve this objective, the production or the you can say the associate team of the store conducted an observational data collection process. So with the parents' consent, they send the children into the room full of toys, or in other room they can observe the children's toy selection, their activities or their way of selecting the toys, and this observation will help them in the production process of the new toy collection. And that is the one of the example of the primary data collection method. The next example could be a rental company who wants to learn about the customer perception and experiences. So the researcher conduct a survey and send it to the very valuable customer. And this survey consists of the multiple choice question and the short questions that would help the company to evaluate what its clients think about its services and cost effectiveness. And at the end of the survey, it assembles the valuable data about what its clients want from it. And that's why, as the survey method is being used, so it is one of the method of the primary data collection. Now we can come up to the next section, that is the sources of secondary data. The first one is a natural organization. It could refer the Central Statistical Organization, National Sample Survey Organization, Office of the Registrar of Journal and Census Commissioner of India, Labor Bureau, and so on. Even the Economic Times are also comes under national organization. There are more international organizations such as the United Nations Organization, World Health Organization, International Collection of Data Labor Organization, which in short we can also say LILO, and International Monetary Fund, that is called the IMF, and the World Bank. In the next session is the precautions in the use of secondary data. So before any researcher use such data, the following precautions should be considered. The first, suitability. The investigator must ensure that the data which is available on the online sources is whether suitable for the purpose of the inquiry on hand or not. The suitability of the data may be judged by compare the nature and the scope of investigation. The next precaution to be is reliability. It is almost important to determine that how reliable is the data from the secondary sources and how confidently the researcher can use such type of data. And the last is adequacy. The data from secondary sources may be available, but its scopes may be limited. Therefore, it may, may not serve the main objective of the investigation. and the data may also cover only a part of the respondent of the investigator and may also pertain to the different time period or may take a long period. So that could be one of the precaution that researchers should consider, that's called adequacy. Now the next section, that what is exactly called a census and sample. When we talk about the census, in short, we can also call a complete investigation, a complete enumeration of the data. A census is a study of every unit, everyone, everything in the population. So once a researcher has decided to study every element of the population, that is exactly called census, and it is known as the complete enumeration, which means a complete count without missing any count. Next, the next concept is sample, whereas the census called a complete enumeration, so the sample may call a partial enumeration. So sample is a subset of the units in the population where the researcher select the few units in the population so that they could represent all units in the population of interest. And when the researcher do such, it is called a partial enumeration, because it is a count from the part of the population. It means it is a subset of units in the population where whose the researcher is selected to represent all units in the population of its interest. Info Information from the sampled units is used to investigate the characteristics for the entire population of units. So the next section is the types of classification. The first one is a geographical classification. It is according to the area or region. For example, when we consider the production of wheat state-wise, it is called a geographical classification. The next classification called a chronological, according to the occurrence of an event with respect of the time period. For example, sales figure of the company for the last 6 years or 6 months. Next is qualitative. It's according to the attributes. For example, we may classify the population on the basis of the demographic variables. It could be occupation, it could be income, it could be employment level and the employed. In other words, we can classify the employment attribute that could be employed or unemployed. It could also classify the population on the basis of literacy, like literate or unliterate. Next classification is a quantitative, according to the magnitudes. For example, the employees of the company may be classified according their monthly salaries, according their monthly performances. And that is exactly called a quantitative classification. The next section called a discrete data. What is the meaning of discrete data? The data which only take or consider a certain values or numeric values without having any frequencies, that's called a discrete data. This is a data that can be counted and has a limited number of values, and it comes in the form of whole numbers or integers. These values must fit into certain categories and cannot be broken in the smaller parts. Discrete data examples can also given in the following ways: the size of your department workforce, how many new clients you brought on board in the previous quarter, how many items are currently kept in stock. So when you answer these questions, you will only give a certain value, and that is exactly called a discrete data or discrete values. For example, in a tabulation form, how old is each employee? So the ages has been given, the one variable that's called ages, and a certain value is also been given in the form of number of employees. So in the age group of 16, 8 employees, in the 17, 12 employees, and up to 20, an age group 4 employees. So when you are giving the answer of this question, then of course you are giving or take a certain value that is exactly called a discrete value or a discrete data. The next concept is a continuous data. Continuous data are those can be measured. It is conceivable of for this data to take on an unlimited number of different values because its values are never be fixed. There are smaller individual components that make up these matrices of measuring it. Continuous data example would also include the following: that individual, you can say state individual stare or weight, the temperature daily in your city, how much time is required to finish an activity or project. So this is how to represent the continuous data. There is exam score and how many students have scored between 50 to 59. Only the 2 students have secure the comes under 50s. Well, how much the students score in 60s, only 5 students, and 70s only 7, 80s only 7, then 90s only 4 students. So when the particular series, a beginning number of the series, that's called a lower class limit, and when the series any digit ended the series, that's called the upper class limit. And when there is a difference of the you can say upper limits, that called a class width, when we call when there is the difference of the lower limits, that would be called a class width, that is 90 minus 80, which is equal to 10. So this is how these three terms is to be denoted in case of the continuous data. Let's talk about what is frequency distribution and what is exactly the frequency distribution table. Frequency distribution is a visual representation of data that shows that how often a particular value of characteristic occurs, while a frequency table is a way to organize that data in a table. Frequency distribution is a visual representation that shows the pattern of frequencies for a particular variable, and frequency distribution can show the absolute and the relative frequency in the form of percentages or the proportion, and they can be displayed in a varieties of ways, including the tables, graph, histograms, or bar charts. But in case of the frequency table, which summarizes a set of data that display the frequencies of the data in various categories, it could be intervals or values. And frequency tables can also be used to summarize both categorical or the numerical data. That how to construct the discrete frequency distribution. To construct a discrete frequency distribution table, you have to follow these particular steps. To create a table with 3 columns: first column, second column, and third column. First column, list each item in the data set once. Use the tally mark to record the frequency of each item and write the frequency of each item. So use a tally chart to count and record the frequency of the data. For each item, place a vertical line in the second column for each repetition. So when you have a 4 vertical lines, you can say slash them to create a group of 5 and count the number of times such items appears and write the frequency in the third column. So for the last of the table, include the total number of observation. So this is how it looks like. Where, for example, we have given the following discrete data and we need to construct a discrete frequency distribution. So this is a bus, walk, and you can say bike and car. So these are the four option of transportation facility, that how many numbers or how many times this transportation facilities are actually occurs. So if you look up the walk, so one by one, once you marking the once you do the telemark, accordingly you just added all the telemarks, and once you add all the telemark, that could call a frequency that has been listed in the table, that in the form of numeric values, that is 15, 12, 7 and 6. And this is, we form the table and find the frequency. So this is how we estimated the frequencies in this next table. So this is a way that how we prepare in case of the discrete data. Now, how to construct a continuous frequency distribution table. So this is a consider the following data of various numeric individual values, and the first step is to determine the range of the data set. So we need to estimate the maximum value or the minimum value. So among the data, the maximum value is 98 and minimum value is 0. That could refer a range, that is 98 minus 0, it becomes 98. In step 2, divide the range by the number of classes that we want our data, and then round up. So let the number of classes be 10. So it was based on the assumptions that the number of classes could be 10, and accordingly we just divide the highest number by 10, and that would call a class width, that is 9.8. So we consider 10 is as a class size. So create the class interval using the class width, as the class width is 10. So we just begin the series, and the highest number is 98, so just begin the series difference of 10, that is 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, and at last 90 to 100. So this is how the class intervals has been made, and that's why this steps has been taught in this particular session. This is how the frequency table looks like. The class interval has been mentioned, which has been which has been created, that is 0 to 10, 10 to 20 till 90 to 100, and the frequency will be based on the corresponding observation. Let's say how many values comes under 0 to 10. So if you look up the data over here, so if you look up the data, this is the data has been given, just look any values that comes under 0 to 10. So if you look up, that is only the one value we can see, that is 0, and that is 1. So it means there is another value which also shows 10, but the 10th value which always exists among 10 to 20. So if any 30 value comes in this data, so that value which comes under 30 to 40 rather than 20 to 30. So this is how we just prepare the continuous frequency distribution table using this data one by one. So once the first value is 17, so accordingly we just mark the corresponding information 17, so it comes under 10 to 20. So it has been written the values, the 10, 17, 12, 14, 14 again. So how many values that corresponding observation has been you can say exist using that quotient, that set of values, that to be frequency 8 under the class interval 10 to 20, and so on. Doing this same, following up the same procedure, we will easily get the frequencies. Now we can come up to the next section that's called the central tendency. In statistics, the central tendency is a descriptive summary of whole data set. The single value from the data set, it reflects the center of the data distribution. It does not provide the information about the individual data from the data set, where it gives a summary of that data set. It gives a summary of that discrete data set. It also gives a summary of a discontinuous data set. So the central tendency of a data set can be defined using some of the measures in statistics. The central tendency is also stated as a statistical measure which represents the single value of the entire distribution or data set. It also aims to provide an accurate description of the entire data in the distribution. So these are the main three measures of central tendency. The first one is mean, median, and mode. So let's talk about the median case. So this is an example, an individual series where no frequencies has also been mentioned and no variable as well. So that to be considered as an individual series or individual data. So now consider an example with an even number of observations that are arranged in descending order like 40, 38, 35, 33 and so on at last 17. How to calculate the median in case of individual series. The formula to calculate the median is n plus 1 item by 2. So how many values are given in the data is 14. So 14 plus 1 by 2, once we calculate, that means 15 by 2 is equal to the 7.5 item. So hence the 7.5 item, when you look up the data, so what was the value on the 7th item? That is when we count, that is 40 is 1, 38 is second, 35 is 3, 33 is 4 item, 32 is 5th item, 30 is a 6th item, and the 7th item is 29. As the 0.5 item is to be considered, that to be valued, consider as 8th item, and that is the value is 27. So when you look up the given data set, the two middle values, that is 7.5, that could be 27 and 29. So once we calculate the summation of these two values and divided by 2, that is 28. So that means 27 plus 29 by 2 is equal to 28. Hence the median for a given data set is 28. If we look, if the median value could comes 8.5, so what would be the 8th item value and what could be the 9th item value? That could be 27 plus 26 by 2. That could be the value of the median. So this is how the even in case of the even you can say number of observations, this is how we need to calculate the value of median. So this is a case of in discrete data where the particular learner or a researcher need to calculate the median. The income is already given in rupees, that is 1000, 2000, and then ended to 4500, and number of workers is 6, 12, 9, 14 and 8. So this is a question of a discrete data. So let's have a table that we have. Income is already shown in the first column. Number of workers, which is already given in the question, has been shown in the second column, and the third column we need to estimate. So when we need to calculate the median, one of the tools that we need to use to estimate the median, that is called the cumulative frequency. Cumulative frequency, it is the addition of all the frequencies one by one. So the cumulative frequency, the first number of worker, that is frequency 6, it remains the same in the cumulative table, that is 6. 6 plus 12 is 18. 18 plus 9 is 27. 27 plus 14 is 41. 41 plus 8 is 49. Now, how to calculate the median? That is, in case of the discrete data, the formula would remains the same to calculate the median, that is n plus 1 item by 2. So what is n here is 49. 49 plus 1, that is 50. 50 by 2, it becomes 25th item. If you look up the column of cumulative frequency, the 25th items comes under 18 to 27, right? So as the 27 value, you can say it will be considered because it is more than the 25th value, and any short value which is less than the 25th item, that will be ignored, that cannot be considered. So the 25th item value which comes under 18 to 27, 18th value cannot be considered, which is lower than the 25th value. And what was the next value has been left, that is 27. And what was the income that to be occurred in under the 27th as a cumulative frequency, that is 2500. So the 2500 is a median. So this is how we need to calculate in case of a discrete series, that is using the cumulative frequency, and that call 2500 is a median. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening this lecture. I will come up to a more interesting and important topics in the upcoming session. So till time, thank you and namaste to all.